Scales dragged his claw across the stone. Tablet for the 100th time that evening, the symbols blurred together in his mind like water mixing with ink. Tomorrow would bring another test and another failure. He knew it as surely as he knew his own name. Around him in the great archive, other dragon students moved with practiced grace. Their eyes scanned ancient texts once and the information locked into their minds. Forever, perfect recall, flawless memory, everything a proper dragon should possess, everything Scales lacked. A blue dragon named Frost glided past without looking at him. She had memorized the entire history of the 17 wars in a single afternoon. Scales had been studying the same material for 3 months and still mixed up which battle happened first. The evening bell rang. Across the learning halls, other students stretched their wings and headed toward the sleeping hollows. Scales remained hunched over his tablet. Maybe if he tried one more time, maybe if he focused harder, maybe if he just stopped being so defective. Still here. Broken mind. A red dragon called Ridge landed beside his study nook. 2 others flanked him, smirking, trying to memorize what day of the week it is. The group laughed. Scales kept his eyes on the tablet and said nothing, responding only made it worse. My hatchling sister has better recall than you, Ridge continued. She's only 4 cycles old. You are 13 and still cannot pass basic history. Leave him alone, a voice said. Ash, a gray dragon from another clutch, hovered nearby. The masters will expel you for harassment. Ridge snorted smoke, but flew off with his friends. Ash nodded at Scales and left as well. Scales appreciated the gesture, but it changed nothing. Tomorrow he would fail again, and everyone would know that he flew to his sleeping hollow as the second moon rose. His parents would receive another report soon, another meeting with the masters, another disappointment etched into their faces. Inside his hollow, Scales curled into a tight ball. Other dragons dreamed in perfect clarity, remembering every moment of their lives with crystal precision. Scales dreamed in questions. Why did the 17th war start? What were the soldiers thinking? How did the common dragons feel when their leaders made those choices? His masters called these questions pointless. Facts mattered, dates mattered, perfect recitation mattered, understanding was just a fancy word for not remembering properly. The next morning arrived too quickly. Scales joined the other students in the testing chamber. Master Bronze stood at the front, his golden eyes sweeping across the room. Today we examine your knowledge of the precursor civilization, Master Bronze announced. You will recite the discovery dates of major artifacts in chronological order. Begin with you, Frost. Frost stood smoothly. The first vault was discovered in cycle 7234. The second vault in cycle 7291. The third vault in cycle 7298. She continued flawlessly through 27. Major discoveries point one by one. Students recited perfect timelines. Then Master Bronze pointed at Scales. Scales stood on shaking legs. The first vault was discovered in cycle. His mind went blank. In cycle 7000, number 7200. I mean, sit down, Master Bronze said. Coldly. Failed again. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Some students looked away in embarrassment. Others smirked. Ridge made a show of shaking his head in mock sadness. After class, Scales found a summons waiting. The Dragon Council wanted to see him and his parents immediately. The council chambers soared high above the learning halls 5 elder dragons sat in judgment, their scales dulled with age, but their minds sharp as ever. Scales' parents stood beside him, their wings drooped with shame. This cannot continue, council leader Granite said. Scales has failed every major examination. He disrupts classes with irrelevant questions. He wastes the master's time. He tries, Scales' mother said quietly. He studies more than any other student. Effort without results is meaningless. Another council member replied, we have standards. If he cannot meet them, perhaps he should pursue other paths. Manual labor, record keeping, something suitable for his limitations. Scales felt his chest tighten. Expelled, cast out, marked as defective forever. Give him one more chance, his father pleaded. One more cycle. The council members conferred in low voices. Finally Granite spoke. Very well, but he must show improvement, real improvement. We will not debate this. Again, outside the chamber, Scales' parents said nothing. Their silence hurt worse than any words. That evening, Scales returned to the archive alone. He did not study. He simply stared at the ancient texts and wondered what was wrong with him. Every other dragon could do this. Why could he not? Through the window, he noticed unusual activity near the archive entrance. Creatures he had never seen before, two-legged, wingless, carrying strange equipment. Humans, he realized, the alien species from the radio broadcasts. One of them, a female with gray-streaked hair, looked up at the archive with bright, curious eyes. She saw Scales watching and smiled. Then she spoke to her companions and pointed at the building. A master approached her and they began talking. Scales could not hear the conversation, but he saw the master shake his head repeatedly. The human kept gesturing, showing images on a glowing device. Discussion grew animated. Finally the master flew away, clearly irritated. The human looked disappointed but not defeated. She noticed Scales still watching and waved. Scales pulled back from the window, confused. Why would a human wave at him? Why would anyone acknowledge the Academy's greatest failure? He returned to his hollow, but sleep would not come. Somewhere below, the human was probably studying the same ruins and artifacts that Scales had failed to memorize, probably making sense of things a superior dragon mind could not grasp. The thought should have depressed him further. Instead, something about that human's curious expression stayed with him. She had looked at the archive like it held mysteries, not just facts to memorize. What a strange way to see the world. Dr. Helen Grant had traveled across 3 star systems to reach the dragon homeworld. She stood before the dragon council now, trying not to show her frustration. Getting permission to study precursor ruins was proving harder than the journey itself. Your request is unnecessary, council leader Granite said. We have documented every artifact, every room, every inscription. Our records are complete and perfect. Helen adjusted her glasses and pulled up a holographic display. I understand your records are thorough but human archaeology uses different methods. We look at context or patterns, chemical residue, things that might reveal new information. There is no new information. Another council member stated. Dragons do not forget. What we have recorded is all that exists. With Respect, you record what you observe. Helen replied, but sometimes we need to observe differently. On Earth we discovered entire civilizations by questioning what we thought we knew. The council members exchanged glances. One leaned forward. You question your own knowledge. What purpose does that serve? Helen smiled. It lets us find what we missed the first time. Granite drummed his claws against the stone floor. Finn. Ni, you may examine the South Archive ruins, but you will need a guide, someone who knows our cataloging system and can access restricted areas. I would be honored to work with one of your scholars. Helen said, you misunderstand. Granite replied, our scholars have important work. We will assign you someone appropriate for this task. 20 minutes later, Helen waited outside the archive as a young dragon approached. Nervously, he was smaller than the others she had seen, with dark green scales that caught the light in interesting patterns. I am Scales, he said quietly. The council assigned me as your guide. Helen extended her hand in a human greeting. Scales stared at it uncertainly before touching it with one claw tip. Nice to meet you, Scales. I am Dr. Helen Grant, but please call me Helen. Dr. Grant, Scales said, ignoring her request. I must tell you that I'm not a good choice for this work. I have failed most of my examinations. The council assigned me as punishment. Helen studied him with interest. Punishment? For what? For being defective. Scales looked at the ground. I cannot memorize information properly. My mind does not work like other dragons. I see. Helen said, well, I'm glad you are here. Anyway, shall we begin? Scales led her into the archive and down ancient corridors. The walls held carvings from the precursor civilization that had vanished thousands of years ago. Helen stopped frequently to examine details, making notes on her tablet. According to the record, Scales said, consulting Stone Directory, this corridor contains artifacts from precursor domestic life. Items 4001 through 4287. All cataloged and dated. What do you think they were used for? Helen asked, pointing at a curved metal object. Scales blinked in confusion. The record says it is a food preparation tool. I know what the record says. I asked what you think. My thoughts do not matter. The record is correct. Helen picked up the artifact carefully. Maybe, but look at these wear marks. They're on the outer curve, not the inner edge where you would expect from food preparation. And this residue here, she scraped a tiny sample. I will test it, but it looks more like mineral deposits than organic matter. Scales moved closer, intrigued despite himself, but the record says records can be wrong. Helen interrupted gently, or incomplete. That is why we question them. They moved through the archive together. Helen asked Scales about various artifacts, always wanting his opinion rather than the official documentation. At first he simply repeated what the record stated, but gradually he began to actually look at the objects. This tool, he said, hesitantly, holding a precursor implement. The record says it is a writing instrument, but the grip seems wrong for precursor hands based on their bone structure in the museums. Helen's eyes lit up. Excellent observation. What else do you notice? The wear pattern suggests it rotated during use, and there are these small holes along the shaft. Scales turned it carefully. Perhaps it was not for writing. Perhaps it drilled or carved. Now you're thinking like an archaeologist, Helen said with Approval. Over the next few hours, they examined dozens of artifacts Scales found, himself seeing details he had never noticed before. The official records had always been enough for Tess. He had never thought to question whether they told the complete story. Why did he do this? Scales asked as they took a break. You travel so far to study ruins that are already documented. Helen sat on a stone bench and gestured for him to join her because perfect documentation is not the same as understanding. Your people have incredible memories, but humans evolved differently. We forget things, so we learn to ask why. We learn to imagine and interpret. That sounds like a weakness, Scales said. It can be, Helen admitted, but it is also a strength. When you memorize facts, you accept them as truth. When you question facts, you sometimes find deeper truths hiding underneath. Scales thought about his years of failure, his inability to memorize like other dragons, his constant questions that irritated the masters. My people think questioning is pointless. Many species do, Helen said, until they meet humans and realize that curiosity drives discovery. They returned to the artifacts. Scales pointed out several more inconsistencies in the official records, small things where patterns that suggested different uses, placement that seemed odd for the documented purposes. Helen made detailed notes on everything. These discrepancies are important. They form a pattern. What kind of pattern? I'm not sure yet, but look here. She pulled up her tablet and overlaid images of different artifacts. These items are all cataloged as coming from different time periods, but they where patterns are similar. The mineral deposits match. I think they were all used in the same process, whatever that was. Scales studied the images. Something clicked in his mind. The precursor records mention a hidden knowledge, something preserved for those who seek understanding over recitation. Helen sat up straighter. Where did you read that? I did not read it. I just remembered. Scales paused, surprised at himself. I forget dates and lists, but I remember strange details, things that seem meaningless. Those details are never meaningless, Helen said. Show me this reference. Scales led her to an ancient text carved into the archive wall. Most dragons memorized it during their first year and never looked at it again. He pointed to a specific passage. Helen read it aloud, translating slowly. We leave behind not answers, but questions. Those who seek only to remember will find only what we showed. Those who seek to understand will find what we hid. They looked at each other. Helen smiled broadly. Scales, I think we just found something important. The precursors left puzzles, not just records, but why? Maybe to test whoever came after them, maybe to ensure their secrets went to minds that could appreciate them. Helen placed her hand on his shoulder. Minds that question rather than just accept. Scales felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, his weakness might actually be a strength. His inability to memorize might let him see what others missed. There is more, he said slowly. These artifacts, the way they are positioned in the archive, if I stop trying to remember their catalog numbers and just look at them. He moved through the room, seeing patterns in the placement. They form a map. Helen followed his gaze. A map to what? I do not know, but it points downward, beneath the archive. Helen pulled out her ground-penetrating scanner. There is a massive chamber below us, empty space where the Geological survey said there should be. Solid rock. Scales felt his heart race. We need to tell the council. We do. Helen agreed, but first, are you sure? About this, if we are wrong it could cause you more trouble, Scales thought. About his failures, his shame, his certain expulsion. Then he thought about that strange click of understanding he had just felt the first time anything had made sense. I'm sure, he said, or at least I want to find out if I am right. Helen grinned. Then let us go present our findings to some very skeptical dragons. The Dragon Council listened to Helen's presentation with expressions that ranged from skeptical to outright dismissive. Scales stood beside her, trying not to let his anxiety show through his scales. You claim there is a hidden chamber based on artifact placement? Council leader Granite asked. Our ancestors cataloged these items. Precisely, their placement is for archival efficiency, nothing more. With respect, Helen said, pulling up her ground-penetrating scan. The geological data shows a void beneath the archive. Large artificial chamber that your survey somehow missed. Impossible. Another council member stated. We have scanned this archive thoroughly for structural integrity. There is no chamber. Scales spoke up before he could stop himself. When was the last full structural scan? The council members turned to him. Granite's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning council procedures? No, I just. Scales forced himself to continue. I wondered if perhaps the precursors had shielding technology, something that would not show up on older scanning methods, but that Dr. Granite's newer equipment could detect. Helen nodded enthusiastically. That is an excellent point. Human technology has advanced significantly in the past decade. Our scanners can penetrate materials that older devices could not. Granite drummed his claws. This is speculation built on speculation. The precursors left no puzzles, they left records. Then let us excavate, Helen said. If we are wrong, we waste a few days of work. If we are right, you gain access to precursor knowledge that has been hidden for millennia. The council conferred in low voices. Finally, Granite spoke. Very well, you may excavate in the location you specified, but when you find nothing, this foolish human dragon partnership ends. Scales returns to his studies and you return to your ship. Understood, Helen said. Outside the council chamber, other dragons had gathered. Word of the presentation had spread. Ridge and his friends smirked from a high perch. Broken mind thinks he found something the masters missed. Ridge called out, this will be entertaining to watch. Scales tried to ignore them. Helen placed a hand on his shoulder. Let them watch. We know what we found. Over the next 2 days, Helen's team brought excavation equipment to the archive. A crowd of dragons gathered to observe. Some came out of curiosity, most came to witness Scales' humiliation. That Helen's crew used carefully controlled sonic drills to avoid damaging any potential artifact. They worked in shifts, slowly removing layers of ancient stone. Scales helped by identifying safe drilling zones based on the artifact placement patterns he had noticed. You have a good eye for spatial relationships, Helen commented as they worked. That is a rare skill. It is not real skill. Scales replied. Not like memorization. Says who? Your masters. Helen wiped sweat from her forehead. Scales different species value different abilities. Dragons prize memory, humans prize curiosity. Neither is objectively better, but in Dragon you're not just in Dragon society anymore, Helen interrupted gently. You're working with humans now, and in this work your skills matter more than perfect recall. They drilled through the morning and into the afternoon. The gathered dragons began to lose interest. Some flew away. Others settled in for naps. Ridge and his friends remained, determined to see the Then just as the third moon rose, the drill broke through into empty space. That Helen's scanner went wild with readings. We have a chamber, large, very large. She looked at Scales with excitement. You were right. The announcement spread through the crowd. Dragons woke and pressed closer. Council members arrived to observe. Scales felt dizzy with a mixture of fear and hope. Then Helen's team carefully widened the opening. They lowered lights and cameras. Into the darkness below, the screen showed glimpses of a massive underground vault filled with structures and technology. By the ancestors, one council member whispered. They spent the next hour making the opening safe enough to enter. Helen insisted on going down first with Scales beside her. Several council members followed, along with archive masters and curious students. The chamber stretched further than their lights could reach. Precursor technology lined the walls, more advanced than anything in the museums above. Central pillars held data storage devices that still hummed with power after thousands of years. This is impossible, Master Braun said, his voice echoing. We documented this site completely. How do we miss an entire chamber? Helen ran her scanner over the walls, shielding. Very sophisticated. It blocked your older technology, but degraded enough over time for my equipment to penetrate. But why hide this? Another master asked. Scales moved toward the nearest data pillar. Something about the symbols carved into its base called to him. Dr. Grant, look at this. Helen examined the carvings. It is precursor script, but not standard documentation. This is poetic, metaphorical. The precursors were scientists, Granite said. They did not write poetry. This one did, Helen replied. It says, we hide our final gift from those who only remember. We reveal it to those who wonder why. Silence filled the chamber. Every dragon present understood the implication. This vault was hidden specifically from minds like theirs. It was designed to be found by minds that questioned and imagined. Scales felt dozens of eyes turned toward him, the defective dragon, the failure, the one who could not stop asking why. There is more writing, Helen said, moving to another pillar. Instructions, or rather riddles. The precursors encoded their final knowledge in puzzles that require interpretation. We can decode them, Master Braun said. We have the finest linguistic experts. Helen shook her head. Not decode, interpret. There's a difference. This is not just about translating words. It is about understanding context and meaning. She turned to Scales. You noticed the artifact patterns that led us here. You saw what others missed because you do not just memorize, you question. Can you read this differently than a typical dragon would? Every dragon in the chamber watched him. Scales approached the pillar and studied the symbols. If he tried to memorize them, they blurred, like always. But if he just looked at them and wondered what they meant. This section talks about a gift, he said slowly. Not a physical object, a way of thinking. The precursors say they evolved past the need for perfect Memory, they learned to imagine and create instead. Impossible, a council member said. Perfect memory is the foundation of intelligence. Not for them, Scales continued, his confidence growing as the symbols made sense in a way formal education never had. They say memory is a tool, not a purpose. They wanted their knowledge to go to species that understood that. Helen recorded everything he said. Keep going. What else do you see? This pillar describes a test. The chamber is filled with precursor knowledge, but it is locked behind puzzles. Anyone can memorize answers. Only those who truly understand can solve these challenges. Master Braun stepped forward. Then we will study the puzzles, document them, find the patterns. That is not how this works, Helen said firmly. This requires creative thinking, lateral problem solving skills your education system does not teach. Are you saying dragons cannot solve all these puzzles? Granite asked dangerously. I'm saying most dragons cannot, Helen replied, but Scales can. That is why the precursors designed it this way. They knew that any successful species would have diverse minds. They wanted to reward those who thought differently. Scales looked around at the vast chamber. Months ago, he had been ready to accept expulsion. Today he stood in a precursor vault that he and he alone among his people could hope to unlock. I will try, he said, but I might fail. I fail at most things. You have not failed yet today, Helen pointed out. You found this chamber when countless perfect memory dragons missed it completely. Ridge spoke up from the back of the group. This is lucky guess, nothing more. Tomorrow he will fail as always. Then tomorrow we will see, Scales replied, surprising himself with his steady voice. The council members conferred. Finally Granite spoke. Very well, Scales and Dr. Grant will work together to interpret the precursor puzzles, but we will document everything. If there is knowledge here, it belongs to all dragons, of course. Helen agreed. We are not here to steal. We are here to understand. As they prepared to leave the chamber for the night, Scales took one last look at the pillars. Thousands of years ago, an entire civilization had designed the place. They had known that minds like his would eventually find it. For the first time in his life, Scales wondered if being different might actually mean being exactly what someone needed. Scales woke before dawn, his mind already racing with thoughts of the precursor vault. He arrived at the archive to find Helen already there, reviewing scans from the previous day. Cannot sleep either, she asked with a tired smile. Too many questions, Scales admitted. Good questions are exactly what we need today. The council had assigned a full research team to document their work. Master Braun and 3 other scholars waited at the vault entrance, along with several younger dragons taking notes. Ridge watched from a distance, clearly hoping to witness another failure. They descended into the chamber. Helen's equipment provided better lighting today, revealing even more of the vast space. The precursor data pillars stood in a pattern that looked random until Scales stopped trying to make sense of it and just observed. They form a spiral, he said, starting from the outer edge and moving inward like a journey. Helen added, from basic concepts to more complex ones. They approached the first outer pillar. Its surface showed symbols arranged in ways that frustrated the dragon scholars. Master Braun had spent hours trying to apply traditional translation methods and got nowhere. The symbols follow grammatical rules, he explained with frustration, but the meanings make no sense. Blue remembers. Sideways, stone dreams forward, light questions backward. It is not literal translation, Scales said, studying the pillar. It is metaphor. Dragons do not use metaphor in technical documentation, Master Braun replied, but the precursors did, Helen pointed out, or at least they did in this chamber. Scales, what do you think it means? Scales walked around the pillar, looking at the symbols from different angles. Blue remembers. Sideways, water is blue, water flows around obstacles, not through them. Maybe it means flexibility. Helen nodded. Encouragement, keep going. Stone dreams forward. Stone is permanent, but mountains erode, they change over time. Dreams are about future possibilities. Scales felt the meaning click into place. It is about how different materials and concepts relate to time and change. That is speculation, Master Braun said, not translation. It is interpretation, Helen corrected, and it seems to be working. Scales, try touching the symbols in the order you just described. Scales hesitated, then pressed his claw to the symbols, representing water, flexibility, stone, and change in sequence. The pillar hummed, light spread through channels in the stone, connecting this pillar to the next one in the spiral. The watching dragons murmured in surprise. Master Braun looked stunned. How did you know to do that? Ridge called out. I did not know. Scales replied honestly, I guess based on what felt right. They moved to the second pillar. This one showed images instead of words, scenes of precursor life. Helen recorded everything while the dragon scholars debated the image's significance. These show technological advancement. One scholar said, the progression from simple tools to complex machines. But Scales saw something different. It is not about the technology. Look at the precursors themselves. In the early images, they stand apart. In the later ones, they work together. The technology brings them closer. Helen examined the images more carefully. He is right. This is not a technology timeline. It is a social evolution timeline. The precursors are showing how they learned to cooperate. What does that have to do with hidden knowledge? Master Braun asked. Maybe everything, Scales said. Maybe they are trying to tell us something about how to use what they left behind. He touched the images in the order they appeared, focusing on the precursors themselves rather than their tools. Again, the pillar lit up and connected to the next one in the sequence. They worked through 6 pillars over the next several hours. Each one required looking past obvious meanings to find deeper truths. Each one frustrated the dragon scholars who tried to apply logic in memorization, but Scales found himself understanding the precursor mindset more. With each puzzle, they valued imagination over certainty, questions over answers, the journey over the destination. This is exhausting, he admitted to Helen during a break. My mind works differently than normal dragons, but it still gets tired. That is because you are really thinking, Helen replied, not just retrieving stored information. Creation always costs more energy than recall. Is that a human saying? No, I just made it up. But it is true. The 7th pillar stood taller than the others. Its symbols were more complex, layered, ways that seemed impossible to interpret. Master Braun had given up trying after the first hour. Scales stared at it until his eyes hurt. Nothing clicked, no sudden understanding, just confusion and a growing certainty that he had reached his limit. I cannot read this one, he told Helen quietly. I do not know what it means. Then let us try something different, she suggested. Stop trying to interpret the symbols. Tell me what you feel when you look at them. What I feel, yes, emotions, impressions. Sometimes understanding comes from here. She tapped her chest. Not here. She tapped her head. Scales looked at the pillar again, letting himself feel instead of think. Sadness, loss, but also hope, like saying goodbye to someone but knowing they will be okay. The precursors left this world, Helen said softly. These are their final messages. Keep going. What else? Pride, not in themselves, in whoever solves these puzzles, like a teacher proud of a student. Scales felt tears form, something dragons rarely experienced. They're saying farewell and thank you and good luck. He reached out and touched the symbols that felt like sadness, then hope, then pride. Pillar erupted with light brighter than all the others combined. Illumination spread across the entire chamber, revealing what had been hidden. In the darkness, the center of the spiral held a massive sphere of precursor technology, data storage beyond anything the dragons possessed. Records, schematics, knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of precursor civilization, but more importantly, written across its surface in letters large enough to read from anywhere in the chamber. To those who find this, who question when others merely remembered, who imagined when others merely recorded, who wondered why when others only asked what. This is our legacy. Use it with the wisdom you have already shown by reaching this place. The chamber fell silent. Every dragon present stared at the sphere and its message. Then they looked at Scales. I did not do this alone, Scales said quickly. Dr. Grant helped me. She taught me how to think differently. I taught you nothing, Helen replied. I just helped you see what was already inside you. Council leader Granite descended into the chamber, having been summoned when the central sphere activated. He looked at the message, then at Scales, then back at the message. It appears, Granite said slowly, that we have been teaching the wrong lessons. Not wrong, Helen corrected diplomatically. Incomplete. Dragons have remarkable memory. That is a great strength, but is not the only strength worth cultivating, Master. Bronze approached Scales. I owe you an apology. I called your questions pointless. I marked you as deficient. But you found what none of us could. I just saw things differently, Scales said. Exactly, Master Bronze replied. And we need that. Perhaps we have always needed it, but never recognized it. Ridge flew down from his perch. For a moment, Scales expected mockery. Instead, Ridge dipped his head in the dragon gesture of respect. I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. The apology shocked Scales more than anything else. That day, Ridge was proud. Dragons like him never admitted fault. Thank you, Scales managed to say. Helen began scanning the central sphere, her equipment recording vast amounts of data. This will take weeks to fully analyze, but from what I can see, the precursors left information about everything: their science, their culture, their mistakes and successes, and warnings, Scales added, pointing to a section of the sphere. See those symbols? They are marked differently. More urgent. Helen focused her scanner on that section. Her expression changed from excitement to concern. These are Threat warnings, something that made the precursors leave their world. What kind of threat? Granite asked. I will need time to translate it properly, but it appears to still be relevant. The precursors believed this threat would return. Helen looked at Scales. They left instructions for dealing with it. But like everything else here, those instructions require interpretation, not just translation. Scales felt the weight of what they had discovered. Finding the chamber had been just the beginning. Understanding it would take much longer, and some of that understanding might be desperately needed. I will help translate, he said. Whatever it takes, we all will. Granite announced. This affects everyone as they prepare to leave the chamber for detailed planning. Scales took one last look at the central sphere the precursors had hidden there. Knowledge from minds that questioned. They had known that progress required more than memory. They'd been right. 3 days passed in intense work. Helen brought additional human experts to help with the translation. The Dragon Council assigned their best linguistic scholars to the project, but the precursor warnings resisted all traditional methods of interpretation. Scales sat before a section of the central sphere. Exhausted, they had made some progress. The threat the precursors fled from was called the silence in their language. It was something that moved through space, consuming worlds, but the details remained unclear. The instructions for defense were encoded in the same metaphorical language as the rest of the chamber. Every time they thought they understood a passage, it revealed new layers of meaning. I do not know if I can do this, Scales admitted to Helen. During a brief rest, everyone is counting on me to solve these puzzles. But this is too important. What if I get it wrong? Then we try again, Helen said simply. That is how discovery works. Failure and revision and eventual success. Dragons do not fail, Scales replied. We remember correctly or we are defective. Scales, look at me. Helen waited until he met her eyes. You have already proven you are not defective. You found this chamber. You saw the pillar puzzles. You are the reason we know about the silence at all. But what if that is not enough? Then it is not enough and we find another way, but giving up now helps no one. Master Bronze approached with a tablet showing new scans. We have isolated what appears to be the defense system instructions, but the language. He shook his head in frustration. It describes building something, but the components make no sense. Gather whispers of the solar wind, forge them with crystallized time, bind them with threads of possibility. Poetry. One of the human experts said dismissively. Not engineering, but Scales studied the passage carefully. Something about it felt familiar. Dr. Grant, what do humans call the energy that flows from stars? Solar wind is one term. Charged particles streaming from the sun. And what are crystals? Structured matter. Atoms arranged in repeating patterns. Helen's eyes widened. Are you thinking the precursors used poetic language to describe actual technology? They used metaphor for everything else, Scales said. Why not this? Whispers of solar wind could mean capturing solar energy. Crystallized time could mean precision. Timing crystals. Master Bronze pulled up technical databases. We have solar collection technology and timing crystals for our communication systems. What about threads of possibility? Helen typed rapidly on her tablet. Quantum entanglement. Humans are still researching it, but it connects particles across distances in ways that seem impossible. Multiple possibilities existing at once until observed. That is theoretical physics, Master Bronze said. Surely the precursors would not base a defense system on unproven concepts. Maybe that is exactly what they did, Scales replied. They said this chamber was for those who imagine. What if their technology requires imagining possibilities, not just calculating certainties? They spent the next hours working through the instructions with this new understanding, poetic language translated into technical specifications. The precursors had not written unclear instructions, they had written instructions that required creative interpretation to understand. It is a network, Helen said, assembling the translated specifications. Satellites that collect solar energy, process it through quantum entangled crystals, and create a defensive field around the planet. But the field does not block matter, Scales added. Reading further, it blocks the silence. Specifically, the precursors describe it as a consciousness or energy that mimics consciousness. Master Bronze looked troubled. That changes everything. We thought we were defending against physical threat. If the silence is something else, we need to finish translating before we can know what it truly is, Helen said. Scales, this section here describes the timeline. Can you interpret it? Scales studied the symbols. They showed cycles and patterns. The precursors calculated when the silence would return. They built the defense network and hid the instructions, hoping whoever found them would have time to prepare. How much time? A council member asked. Scales did the calculations, converting precursor cycles to dragon years. His blood went cold. If their math is correct, the silence arrives in 17 days. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. 17 days to build a defense system they barely understood, based on technology that required theoretical physics to function. We cannot build this in 17 days, Master Bronze said, even if we had complete plans, which we do not. The precursors knew that, Scales said. Finding another section, they did not expect one species to build it alone. These instructions describe assembly by multiple civilizations working together. Different perspectives, different skills. Helen understood immediately. They designed it to require cooperation. Like everything else in this chamber, it tests whether those who find it have learned to work together despite differences. We need to contact other species, Granite said, but which ones? We have diplomatic relations with several neighboring civilizations, but sharing this technology the humans have. The quantum research, Helen pointed out. The Kelvin have advanced solar collection. The raids specialize in satellite networks. Each species has pieces of what we need, and we have 17 days to convince them all to help. Another council member added. Scales looked at the defense system plans. Even partially translated, he could see the brilliance the precursors had created. Something that required imagination, cooperation, and courage. It was a test as much as a tool. I will help, he said. I can translate as we build. We do not need to understand everything before starting. We can learn as we work. Master Bronze placed a wing on Scales' shoulder. You have already done more than anyone could ask, but if you are willing to continue, we need you. The next days blurred into constant activity. Helen contacted human Scientific institutions, the Dragon Council reached out to neighboring species. Within 2 days, the first ships arrived carrying engineers and equipment the Kelvin brought there. Solar collection experts, tall, crystalline beings who processed information through light. The raid sent their satellite engineers, small but brilliant insect-like creatures who thought in networks and connections. 3 other species contributed specialized knowledge. Scales found himself working with beings nothing like dragons. Each species approached problems differently. The Kelvin saw patterns in light. The raid thought in simultaneous parallel processes. The humans imagined possibilities, and Scales translated precursor instructions into forms each species could understand. His inability to think like a typical dragon became his greatest asset. He could shift perspectives, seeing how each species would interpret the same information. This section describes energy flow, he told the Kelvin engineers, but not as movement through space, as harmony between different frequencies. Does that make sense to you? The lead Kelvin chimed in. Agreement, yes, we understand resonance. We can build this component to the raid. He described the satellite network not as individual machines, but as a colony with distributed intelligence, each one part of a greater whole. The raid clicked their mandibles excitedly. Like our cities, we know the structure. Helen watched them work with visible pride. You are the bridge between species. That is a rare and valuable thing. I just speak differently to different listeners, Scales said. Exactly. Most beings can only communicate one way. You adapt. She pulled up a holographic timeline. We have 9 days left. The framework is coming together, but we are behind schedule. Scales looked at the partially assembled defense network components from 6 different civilizations, each built according to translated precursor designs. It should have been chaos. Instead, it was starting to look like something unified and purposeful. The precursors knew, he said suddenly. They knew the only species that could rebuild their defense would be ones that learned to cooperate. The silence does not just threaten individual worlds, it threatens anyone who cannot work together. A test. Helen agreed, and we are showing we can pass it. Master Bronze approached with more dragon engineers. We have completed the power distribution network. The humans and Kelvin are ready to begin integration tests. The raid need 2 more days for the satellite positioning. Another engineer reported, we have 9 days until the silence arrives. Granite reminded everyone, we must be faster. Scales looked at the assembly schedule, then at the precursor instructions. Something clicked in his mind. We are building this in the wrong order. The precursors designed it to be assembled simultaneously, not sequentially. All species working at once, each on their part, trusting others to complete theirs. That is incredibly risky, Master Bronze said. If one component fails, the entire system fails, but it is the only way to finish in time, Helen said. Precursors built cooperation into that very structure. We have to trust each other. Granite looked around at the assembled species. Dragons, humans, Kelvin, raid, and others, all working on a dead civilization's last gift. Then we trust all species proceed with simultaneous construction. Scales will coordinate translations. We succeed together or not at all. Scales felt the weight of responsibility, but also something else, purpose. For the first Time in his life, his differences, mattered in ways that helped rather than hurt. I will not let you down, he said. You already have not, Granite replied. Now let us make sure the precursors gift does not go to waste. 5 days before the silence was predicted to arrive, disaster struck. The quantum entanglement crystals shattered during integration testing. Without them, the defense network would not function, and growing replacement crystals required time they did not have. Scales stood in the command center surrounded by panicking engineers from multiple species. The holographic display showed red failure markers across the entire system schematic. We are finished, Master Bronze said heavily. Without the crystals, we cannot create the defensive field. Can we modify the design? Helen asked. Use something else. The human quantum physicist shook her head. The crystals are fundamental to how the system works. They connect the satellites across impossible distances. No substitution exists. Scales ignored the chaos and focused on the precursor instructions. There had to be something they missed. The precursors would not build a system that failed this easily. He scrolled through sections they had already translated, looking for anything about the crystals. Then he found it. Passage they had dismissed as ceremonial. The crystals grow from belief. They strengthen through trust. They function through unity. That is poetry, the physicist said, not physics. Everything else in this chamber was. Both Scales countered. He read the full passage aloud, translating as carefully as possible. The binding threads exist between minds as much as between particles. Those who doubt create fractures. Those who trust create coherence. The crystals are not separate from those who use them. They are extensions of collective will. That is impossible, Master Bronze said. Materials have fixed properties. What does not change physics? But the Kelvin engineer chimed in, her crystalline body resonating with sound. Not impossible. We use thought resonance to process information. Our entire species exists at the boundary between consciousness and matter. You're saying the crystals require belief to function? Helen asked. I am saying the precursors created technology that integrates consciousness. Scales replied. It is not fully mechanical. It is also not fully organic. It exists in between, like so much of what they built. The raid engineer clicked agreement. Our colonies function through distributed consciousness, one mind across many bodies. This concept is not strange to us. Scales looked around the room at representatives from 6 different species. The precursors designed this system to be operated by multiple civilizations working together. What if that is not just about building it? What if the defense requires our combined consciousness to function? You're suggesting we can fix the crystals through collective thought, Master Bronze asked skeptically. I am suggesting we try, Scales said. Precursors left no backup plans because they knew this was the only way it could work. Species that cannot cooperate in mind as well as action cannot operate this defense. Helen stepped forward. Then let us try what we need to do. Scales translated more of the passage. Form a connection. Each species contributes their unique way of thinking. Dragons hold memory and structure. Humans provide imagination and questions. Kelvin bring harmony and resonance. Raid offer network consciousness. The others contribute their own strengths. This sounds like Mysticism, the physicist protested. Maybe, Helen replied, but we have 4 days left and no other options. I'm willing to try. Granite arrived in the command center, having been summoned. Urgently, he listened to Scales explain the situation and the proposed solution. His expression remained unreadable. You're saying our defense system requires something dragons do not believe in, Granite said finally. Collective consciousness, willpower, affecting matter, concepts are science. Considers fantasy, yes, Scales admitted. But the precursor's science was far beyond ours. Maybe they understood things we still think are impossible. Granite looked at the shattered crystals in their containment field. Then he looked at Scales. You have been right about everything else. I suppose we must trust you on this as well. They gathered in the chamber around the central precursor sphere. Representatives from each species formed a circle around the broken crystals. Scales stood at the center, reading instructions that made perfect sense and no sense simultaneously. Clear your minds, he said, translating the precursor guidance. But do not empty them, fill them with trust in each other. Remember why you came here. Remember that you chose to cooperate when you could have refused. The dragons focused on their perfect memories, sharing the history of the past days through their linked consciousness. Every moment of discovery and cooperation, the humans contributed their imagination, visualizing the crystals reforming and functioning. Helen specifically thought about the moment she first met Scales, when she saw potential others dismissed. The Kelvin resonated at frequencies that bridged the gap between thought and matter, their crystalline bodies creating harmonic patterns in the air. The raid networked their minds, creating a distributed consciousness that encompassed everyone present, making them briefly one entity with many perspectives. The other species added their own unique contributions, patterns of thought no single civilization could create alone. Scales felt it happening, the connection forming, not losing individuality but sharing it. He could sense the Kelvin's perfect harmony, the raid's networked awareness, Helen's boundless curiosity, Master Bronze's structured knowledge, and in that moment of perfect cooperation the crystals began to reform, slowly at first, then faster, molecular structures aligning, quantum states synchronizing across impossible distances. The crystals grew from fragments to whole structures, glowing with energy that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When the connection faded and individuals became separate again, the crystals floated in their containment field, perfectly formed and already entangled with their counterparts in the satellite network. The physicist stared at her instruments. That is impossible. We just witnessed impossible. We witnessed precursor science, Helen corrected, her voice shaking with wonder, and proved we are ready to inherit it. Over the next 3 days they completed the defense network. Every species worked simultaneously, trusting others to succeed at their tasks. The satellites launched and positioned themselves perfectly. The solar collectors came online. The quantum crystals linked the entire system into one vast instrument that on the final day, as the precursor calculations predicted, the silence arrived. It appeared at the edge of the system as distortion in space itself, not a physical object but an absence, void that consumed light and matter. And if the precursors were right, consciousness itself, the defense Network activated automatically. Solar energy flowed through quantum linked crystals, creating a field that existed partially in normal space and partially in places the dragons had no names for. The field spread across the planet. Invisible but present, the silence moved. Closer, it touched the field and stopped for long minutes. Nothing happened, then the silence withdrew. Moving back toward the edge of the system, it remained there briefly as if considering, then disappeared entirely. The command center erupted in celebration. Every species represented joined in according to their customs. The Kelvin chimed harmonically. The raid clicked in rhythmic patterns. Dragons roared, humans cheered and embraced. Scales found himself surrounded by congratulations from beings of multiple species. Ridge approached and bowed deeply. You saved us all. I will never doubt you again. Master Bronze placed both wings on Scale's shoulders. You proved that different minds have different values. The Council will establish new education paths for dragons like you. We will learn to value questions as much as answers. Helen hugged him and Scales awkwardly returned the gesture. You did it, she said. Everything the precursors hoped for, we did it. Scales corrected, all of us. Together, Granite called for attention. The precursors left their legacy too. Those who could cooperate across differences. Today we proved worthy, but more importantly, we proved that our future requires exactly this kind of cooperation. From this day forward, our species will maintain formal partnerships. We will learn from each other. We will value different ways of thinking. The other species leaders agreed. What started as emergency cooperation became the foundation for lasting alliance. Weeks later, after the various species ships departed and life returned to normal, Scales found himself teaching at the archive. Not traditional classes of memorization, but new courses in interpretation and creative thinking. His students were young dragons who struggled with perfect recall. They asked too many questions. They imagined too much. They thought differently, and for the first time in dragon history, that was exactly what their teachers wanted. Scales stood before his class, showing them the precursor vault that he had discovered. The precursors left this for minds like yours, he told them. They knew that progress requires different perspectives. Memorization matters, but so does imagination. Perfect recall has value, but so does creative interpretation. A young student raised her wing nervously. But what if we fail the traditional test? Scales smiled. I failed every traditional test. I was called broken mind, defective, my own people wanted to expel me. He gestured to the vault around them. Then I found this. I saved our world, not despite my differences, but because of them. The students looked at him with hope. For the first time they saw their struggles reflected in a teacher who succeeded rather than failed. The precursors left us a message. Scales continued. They said their legacy belongs to those who question when others merely remember, who imagine when others merely record, who wonder why when others only ask what. He looked at each student. That is you, that is all of you, and that is exactly who we need you to be. Helen appeared in the doorway, having returned for a follow-up research expedition. She caught Scales' eye and smiled proudly. Your assignment, Scales told his students, is to find something in this archive that everyone thinks is fully understood. Then show me why they might be wrong. Question everything. Imagine the possibilities. Wonder why, the students scattered excitedly through the vault, scales. Watch them explore with the same curiosity that had led him here months ago. Master Bronze joined him, observing the young dragons. You have started a revolution in dragon education. Some elders still resist, but the young ones embrace it eagerly. Good, Scales replied. The universe needs different kinds of minds working together. The precursors proved that. We just had to learn the lesson, a student called out, pointing at a section of the vault they had not fully explored. Teacher Scales, I found symbols that do not match the official catalog. Can we investigate? Scales glanced at Helen, who nodded enthusiastically. Yes, he called back. Let us see what questions you can ask about it. As he walked toward the student, Master Bronze stopped him briefly. Do you ever regret your early struggles, the failures and mockery? Scales considered the question. I used to, but those struggles made me who I am. They taught me to think differently, and that is exactly what the universe needed. He looked at his students exploring the vault with wonder. Sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths. We just need someone to help us see the difference. He joined his students, ready to encourage their questions and celebrate their unique perspectives. The precursors had left their legacy to minds that questioned, and a new generation of dragons was learning to question everything. The universe, Scales thought, was about to become